US lawmakers have framed an historic trillion-dollar infrastructure proposal. The bill aims to pump historic levels of federal funding into fixing infrastructure across the United States. The Senate met for a rare weekend session here in Washington. Majority Leader Charles Schumer told the Senate that a bipartisan group has now finished writing the text of the infrastructure bill that is backed by President Biden. And he sounded optimistic, saying he hoped the Senate would approve the bill within days.
Now, the bipartisan group of senators has finished writing the text of the infrastructure bill, and in a moment I'll take the procedural steps to make their legislative language the base of the bill here on the floor. I want to congratulate the members of the bipartisan group for their efforts. We haven't done a large bipartisan bill of this nature in a long time.
Democrats succeeded in convincing a few lawmakers from the Republican camp to work on the proposal, including Republican Senators Rob Portman, Susan Collins, Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski and Bill Cassidy. The bill contains $550 billion in new spending. If passed, it would represent the largest ever federal investments in public transit, drinking and wastewater infrastructure, passenger rail, bridges and national highways. It also aims to tackle the climate change crisis by investing in clean energy products. Those include the electrification of school and transit buses. According to a White House statement, the deal will create millions of jobs. It will help make the U.S. economy robust, sustainable and resilient. Though there may still be many bumps in the road, the proposals that President Joe Biden is embracing would, if passed, be the most significant long-term investment the country has ever made. But Biden's other major economic and social challenge is to pass a $3.5 trillion separate budget package that aims to include once-in-a-generation spending on healthcare, education, social welfare and climate action, and Democrats are not counting on Republicans to back that project.
It attracts our adversaries to compete in ways.
The top U.S. health expert and chief medical advisor to President Biden, Dr. Anthony Fauci, is warning of more pain and suffering ahead as COVID-19 cases continue to surge here. Speaking on ABC's This Week, Dr. Fauci said America's COVID numbers are worsening mainly because of the large number of unvaccinated Americans. But as you'll hear in this report, despite the surge, he says it's unlikely the U.S. will introduce any kind of lockdown.
President Joe Biden's chief medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, said on ABC's This Week that he does not expect the United States to return to lockdowns despite the growing risks of COVID-19 infections posed by the Delta variant.
I don't see that at all happening.
Fauci's comments on Sunday follow a recent interview with Reuters during which the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases said he did not see there being a nationwide vaccine mandate either, but hoped that full FDA approval for COVID-19 vaccines would come this month,
the middle of August,
and spur more Americans to get shots to slow a rising infection rate.
It's going up. How far up it goes is going to depend on how we as a society address it. The more people you get vaccinated, the less likely it's going to go up even more.
Although Fauci did not think the U.S. will need to shut down again as it did last year, he warned on ABC that, quote, things are going to get worse as the Delta variant continues to spread. According to a Reuters analysis, the average number of new U.S. cases reported each day has nearly doubled in the past 10 days, and the number of hospitalized patients in many states is surging. Florida has one of the worst outbreaks in the nation based on new cases per capita. It has reported more than 110,000 new cases in the past week, a 50% increase from the week prior.
The COVID crisis in Australia is getting worse, and the authorities there are struggling to contain the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant. The state of Queensland has extended the lockdown in the city of Brisbane. Meanwhile, in Sydney, in New South Wales, hundreds of soldiers began patrolling to enforce stay-at-home orders. The military will also conduct a door-to-door check to ensure those who have tested positive are isolating at home.
Army patrols hit the streets of Sydney on Monday to help enforce coronavirus curbs as Australia struggles to stop the Delta variant from spreading. Around 300 unarmed military personnel have been tasked with going door to door, checking that people who have tested positive are isolating at home. They're also accompanying police officers on the hunt for rule breakers, combing neighborhoods that have emerged as hotspots as the country's largest city enters its 6th week of lockdown. The state of New South Wales, home to Sydney, reported 207 new cases in the past 24 hours. That follows a 16-month high recorded late last week. Meanwhile, a lockdown in Australia's 3rd biggest city, Brisbane, has been extended. Due to end on Tuesday, it will now stay in place until the end of Sunday. Throughout the global health crisis, Australia has managed to keep its cases relatively low, but its vaccination drive has lagged many other developed countries. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has come under fire for his handling of the pandemic. He's promised that lockdowns will ease once the country vaccinates 70% of eligible citizens, which should happen, he said, by the end of the year. Only around 20% have been inoculated so far.
Amid a growing and unrelenting crisis in Afghanistan, President Ashraf Ghani is blaming the country's deteriorating situation on Washington's sudden decision to withdraw its troops. Ghani addressed the Afghan parliament saying, quote, "We have had an unexpected situation in the last 3 months. The current situation is due to a sudden decision on the withdrawal of the international troops." He added that he had warned Washington that the withdrawal would have consequences.
زموږ د اوسنی وضعیت لامل دا و چې تصمیم ناڅاپه ونیول شو. ما د امریکا جمهور رئیس ته وویل چې فکر ته درناوی لرم ځکه د هغوی فیصله وه، خو زه پوهېدم چې دا فکر ځینې پایلې لري او د خطرونو مدیریت به د افغانانو په غاړه واچول سي.
He also said the Afghan government has a plan to bring conditions under control within 6 months and that the United States is backing that plan. A part of his strategy includes the mobilization of the public for defending the country's democracy under the leadership of the National Directorate of Security. The president of the strife-torn nation also said the Taliban would not move towards peace unless the worsening security situation is addressed.
طالب 24 سال پیش نیست. طالب متشددتر، خونخوارتر و جابرتر بر ما هجوم آورده است. طالب نه تنها این که روابط خود را با دوستان داخلی و بین‌المللی قطع نکرده، بلکه این روابط قوی‌تر شده است. خشونتشان افزونتر شده است.
The Taliban is rejecting Ghani's accusations. In a tweet, the terrorist organization wrote that the speech by Ashraf Ghani is, quote, nonsense. They called it an attempt to control his fears and a dire situation. The Taliban recently asserted that there will be no peace in Afghanistan until there is a new negotiated government in Kabul. The insurgents demanded the removal of President Ghani, but the president says it is time for the Taliban and the Afghan government to accept one another and move towards a peaceful solution. Peace talks between the Afghan government and Taliban negotiators started last year in Doha, but there have been no substantive reports of progress despite several rounds of talks. The two sides, however, have committed to accelerating their discussions. Let's also get you the latest on what's happening on the ground in Afghanistan. Afghan security forces have hit back at the Taliban's rising assaults across several key cities in the country. The Afghan government bombed Taliban positions after the insurgents swarmed major cities. Hundreds of commandos were deployed to Herat in the west of the country, while authorities in the southern city of Lashkargah called for more troops to rein in the assaults. Afghan airstrikes have left scores dead on the streets. The humanitarian organisation Emergency said its hospital in Lashkargah was 90% full after receiving dozens of casualties. In another day of dramatic clashes between the insurgents and Afghan forces, fighting continued on Herat's outskirts overnight, with airstrikes targeting Taliban positions. Herat's provincial governor's spokesman, Jailani Fahad, said around 100 Taliban fighters were killed in the attacks. The Ministry of Defence also said hundreds of commandos had been sent to Herat to help beat back the insurgent assault. The Afghan army spokesperson, Ajmal Omar Shinwari, said that 3 provinces, Herat, Helmand and Kandahar, are now under a state of emergency, but the troops are ready to fight back.
ما کوشش‌های زیاد کردیم که از مردم حفاظت کنیم. طالبان اکثرا در خانه‌های ملکی پناه بردن و از اونجا می‌خواهند که حمله کنند و حمله هم کردند. ما عملیات ما را بسیار با دقت انجام میدیم تا از تلفات ملکی جلوگیری شود.
Flights out of Kandahar were suspended after 2 rockets hit the airport's runway before dawn. Kandahar is Afghanistan's second largest city and the insurgents form a stronghold. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack, saying government warplanes were bombarding their positions from the airport. Flights did resume later on Sunday after the runway was repaired. The Taliban's rapid territorial gains during the final stages of the US military withdrawal have largely been in sparsely populated rural areas. In recent weeks, the Taliban has brought increasing pressure on provincial capitals and seized key border crossings. Even in the final stages of their withdrawal, the US military has also been carrying out airstrikes against the Taliban in a bid to prevent Afghan forces from being overrun in urban areas. Despite the risk of hitting civilians in heavily populated areas, Afghan security forces are also increasingly relying on airstrikes to push the terrorists back from cities. The government has repeatedly dismissed the steady gains made by the Taliban, saying in the past they retained control over seized Afghan cities only briefly. Israel has been joined by its key allies in blaming Iran for a deadly tanker attack off the coast of Oman. The United States and Britain have now thrown their support behind calls for an investigation into the attack. This is despite Tehran's denial of responsibility. Israel accused Iran of a drone attack on the vessel Mercer Street last week in the Arabian Sea. It killed a British security guard and a Romanian crew member. Israel also stressed the need for international action against Iran. The tanker was managed by prominent Israeli billionaire Eyal Ofer. Reports suggest several unmanned Iranian drones appear to have carried out the attack. It was the 5th against a ship connected to Israel since February. The Mercer Street is an oil products tanker. It was travelling from Tanzania to the United Arab Emirates with no cargo aboard when it was attacked. Along with Israel, the United States has also blamed Iran for the deadly assault. A statement by the State Department read, quote, "Upon review of the available information, we are confident that Iran conducted this attack which killed 2 innocent people. The United States will not just help investigate the attack, it has in fact vowed an appropriate response." And US Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke with his Israeli counterpart Yair Lapid about the issue. Both sides have agreed to work with other allies to investigate the facts, provide support and consider appropriate next steps. Britain also affirmed its support of Israel, saying, quote, "It believes the attack on the MV Mercer Street was carried out by Iran and was deliberate, targeted and unlawful." The UK has called on Iran to immediately cease actions that risk regional and international peace and security. Statements from the US and Britain came after the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said there was evidence linking Iran to the attack. Following the incident, Israel profiled Tehran as an exporter of terrorism.
אז אני קובע באופן מוחלט, איראן היא שביצעה את התקיפה כנגד הספינה. אנחנו בכל מקרה יודעים להעביר את המסר לאיראן בדרכים שלנו.
Calling the accusations baseless, Iran not only denied launching the drone strike on the oil tanker, but also warned against any action over the incident. Condemning Israel's remarks, Iran's Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Khatibzadeh said that Iran will not hesitate for a moment to defend its interests and national security, and that it will respond to any adventurism.
اشغالگر قدس بار اولش نیست که از این اتهامات متوجه جمهوری اسلامی ایران کرده. هر کجا این رژیم رفته با خودش ناامنی، ترور و خشونت برده، مسئول وضعیت فعلی همونهایی هستند که پای رژیم اشغالگر قدس رو به این منطقه باز کردن. قطعاً این اظهارات محکوم هست. رژیم اشغالگر قدس باید بدونه که با این فرافکنی ها دردی از دردهاش دوا نمیشه.
WION correspondent Jody Cohen has more now on the story.
There is likely to be increasing pressure on Iran to rejoin negotiations over the nuclear deal, with the swearing in as president on Thursday of hardliner Ibrahim Raisi, often called the hangman of Tehran, who is said to be responsible for the deaths of thousands in Iran. The international community will want to ensure that Raisi doesn't have the capacity to turn that into millions. According to sources, Israel would like to see an international investigation into the latest maritime attack and for the UN Security Council to convene on the matter. India has just taken over the presidency of the UNSC for the month of August and has already stated that its priorities will include the issue of counter-terrorism, peacekeeping and maritime security. This is Jody Cohen from Herzliya, Israel for WION World is One.
Lake Tanganyika, the second oldest freshwater lake in the world, also the second deepest, has submerged neighbourhoods along its shoreline in East Africa. This is due to intense rainfall, accelerated increase in water levels, highlands deforestation, and, of course, climate change.
These are the residents of the Bujumbura neighbourhood, navigating their way through the flooded streets on a boat. Shores along the Tanganyika have been submerged completely, and courtesy of the intense rainfall that Africa has been witnessing of late, leading to an alarming increase in the water levels of the lake, a 2-meter increase in the one last year.
After the neighborhood was flooded, the residents fled to places that were still dry to try and build small slums there to finally spend a day.
The surge in water levels has now submerged homes, businesses, schools, displacing the residents who have been forced to move into makeshift tents, the climate refugees. Deforestation in the highland and water catchment areas has resulted in topsoil erosion, and now water from heavy rainfall is draining into the lakes, resulting in an increase in the water levels and also large silt deposits. Dr. Richard Mbwita, the Assistant Director at the Kenya Meteorological Department, explains further.
Largely there are three theories or hypotheses towards this. The very first one has to do with the global or general weather circulation patterns caused by the rising levels of the sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean as well as the Indian Ocean and the other global oceans. They cause a rise in rainfall, and this increases the water levels when they reach the lakes. The second one is largely geographical, geological, where the researchers say that there are tectonic shifts within the earth surface, and this tends to shift the groundwater, which tends to force the rise in the lakes. Then the third one is basically about deforestation and sedimentation.
Simply put, the region is reeling under the effects of climate change and deforestation. Tanganyika Lake is one of Africa's deepest, and with the surge in water levels, it threatens to swallow whole neighborhoods along its shore, threatening the lives of hundreds of residents.
So the future would likely be that if there are no mitigation measures put in place, we are likely to see more damages to people due to the rises, particularly the displacement of people and also property. However, if proper mitigation are put in place, we are likely to be able to manage these rises.
The natural cyclical rise in lakes happens every 50 to 60 years, but the eroded land and tons of silt in the lakes has now clogged the drainage fault lines, exponentially accelerating this process. According to the United Nations International Organization for Migration, more than 52,000 people have been affected by the flooding. Since March this year in Burundi, data suggests that there were 127,775 internally displaced persons in the country as of May 2021, mostly due to natural disasters. So what is the solution?
The global solution is largely mitigation, which is highly linked to trying to manage climate change. From the Paris Agreement, if we can retain the global average temperatures to below 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next 10 or so years, then that would be a really good action towards limiting the impact of lake level rises and other impacts of climate change.
Glasgow will host the COP26 summit on climate change later this year. The commitments made by global leaders here will directly impact the people living along the shores of East Africa's Great Lakes region. Bureau Report, WION World is One.